man by the name of Josh Tatum is here with his wife and two sons, and they're back there in the nursery, and we've had a chance to say hello to them. They're very active 3-year-olds. But Josh has been a youth minister for about 6 years, and he comes from, both he and his wife, Caitlin, come from a ministry family. Both of their ancestors are former or at some point in life ministers and serving in that way. Josh is a graduate of Manhattan Christian College and participated there in some of the activities, including baseball. Settle down. We'll talk about Iowa State next. Josh doesn't have an accent, but he was born in New York and has been around for a while. Like I told you last week, he's not a candidate for a ministry position here, but he's just reaching out, searching out some opportunities and to find his next activity in life, adventure in life. So if you would, let's welcome a warm welcome to Josh Tatum as he comes and presents a message.
All right, everybody. Hi, how you guys doing? Awesome. My name's Josh Tatum, like you said, and he already kind of introduced my wife, which probably eats up about my kids. It eats about 5 minutes of my sermon, but that's all right. Yes, I'm a graduate from Manhattan Christian College. Played baseball there. Actually was one of the people that helped start the program. I still think it's going. I don't know that. So that's one also really nice interest. If you guys ever want to talk baseball, absolutely love it. And love worship. So I already forget your name. I'm terrible with names, but you did a great job this morning. Really enjoyed it. Also, as we move along, I talk very fast. I don't know if that's a product of my father, who's from New York. So if you can't keep up, I'm sorry. My wife yells at me all the time. Everyone yells at me. Just speak a little slower. And it's really hard for me. It's probably why I don't know if anyone listens to Ben Shapiro, but I like him because he moves fast and I actually can keep up with him, where others think it's annoying. I actually don't. Today's sermon today we're going to go over is called Being Christ-like. And I'm going to throw this aspect in kind of a witness perspective, if you will. And it's not necessarily just on the individual level. As a youth pastor, I've had many of elders and deacons meetings where I'm frustrated because I don't get much of a talk at the table, if you will, because I was just a youth pastor. He's just going to destroy our buildings and we're going to yell at him later. And that's kind of what I'm used to. But in general, going through those meetings the last 6 years and everything else, I've had a real passion, if you will, or I really do read a lot of articles or YouTube videos or whatever us young millennials do. Trying to tackle the conversation or the topic of why are millennials not coming back to church. Our generation, a lot of times we were raised in the church and then we just never come back after college or whatnot, or life starts off. We just don't want to come back. And there was one major issue I want to talk about, and then also applying it to the topic of the sermon, why having a witness and being Christ-like in the context of the American church. When we're doing this, it's kind of like every time we do talking about witness, we always bring up St. Francis, right, where he says, wherever you go, preach the gospel at all times, but if necessary, use words, right? We're going to reference that every now and again because I think when you're talking about witness, that's kind of true, right? A lot of our witnesses isn't necessarily on the words we speak because if anything, we're humans and we, put our foot in our mouth a lot, right? So usually the best way about witnessing is using our actions. And that also stems from the church because the church has actions, right? And the real question I want to ask you guys, this church, because I know nothing about you. I'm just kind of here for a visit, saying hi, serving how I can, is does your church, does the American church in general look more like Christ, or do we look like Pharisees? And when I put in that context of Pharisees, I mean religion, right? And religion isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm not trying to punch down or whatnot and say religion's bad, because, that's a lot of, especially millennials will say is like, well, I kind of like this Jesus character, but I can't do the whole religion thing. And that's not necessarily fair either, and we're going to work into that as well. And when I want you guys to think about when you're talking about the church, what's your language, what's your customs, how do you do your day-to-day? Do you only consume church media, right? Because that's a big thing. Or do you actually go out and actually engage in other media so you know what's kind of going on in the world? And in all honesty, I think sometimes that gets thrown around a lot where it's just like, just watch Christian media. Because honestly, that's only been around, I don't know, for the last 400 years. I mean, you never have a distinction. It doesn't say in the Bible, thou shalt only listen to Christian music, right? That's not a thing. Like, there are things you should listen to Christian music because a lot of it can encourage you in times of need because Christ is in that music. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a rap song by someone that lives in complete sin that sings about his daughter. I think about Eminem for people my age where he sings a song about his daughter, might use some colorful language, but in all essence, when is it a sin to sing about how much you love your daughter or how you want to provide for your daughter? And that can actually be a good thing. And that's kind of the mindset that I want us to think about this morning. Also, something came to my mind as I was driving down here this morning. A lot of context and put scripture to that statement is something Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9:22 and 23. I've become all things to all people, so by all possible means I might save some. I do this all for his sake of the gospel, that I might share in his blessing. When you're in youth work, you kind of realize that, right? Like, I got towards the later years of youth ministry, when I'm in my 30s, I finally have had kids. I don't find it entertaining to stay up all night anymore. Right? I don't, that's not what I thought was a good time. Guess what? 21, all of the time. We would play at Manhattan Christian College. We would sit there and play this game. My wife probably thinks this is annoying. We'd play a game called Star Wars Epic Duels while studying, right? You may like, that's not the best use of your time. I would argue different because, there's like 5-10 minutes between each turn. I can study then while the game's going on, and then I go to my turn, and then I can actually play the game, and it's fun. I'm engaged, and I could stay up all night. But that's not the truth anymore. But guess what? I would stay up all night. I would suffer through it, and then I would cook for 25 teenagers that have been up all night and got to sleep because they can't make it like me because, stud. Really. So that's kind of the point when I'm thinking I become all things. But when it comes to the context of the congregation, your congregation, what could you possibly be doing that might be out of your comfort level that could possibly help you become all things so that you can reach people for Christ? A lot of this, as I said, I've been reading articles or YouTube videos talking about this millennial thing, and there was I don't know if it's a company, I couldn't really find that out, but it's called Barna Group Survey, and they did a survey for a book, I believe, called Unchristian. And we're going to kind of go through that survey to where maybe you guys can use it as leadership or whatnot, to where you can, like, are we doing this right? Are we looking more like Jesus, or are we looking more like the Pharisees, which they label as self-righteous actions? And I'm going to go through each one. You could probably make a sermon series out of this, but as I said, I talk really fast, and I'm going to just basically hit on some points, right? Actions like Jesus. I think it'll be up here on the screen. So the actions like Jesus would be, if you're conducting yourself in a certain ways, I listen to others to learn their story before telling them about my faith. Right, I'm going to throw a story to this. So I was a youth minister, and then I was actually working for a marketing company that does stuff for like Sam's Clubs, Targets, and all this, where we would sell stuff. And I was like, man, I'm doing sales. This is hilarious. Not much of a salesperson. But what it really did teach me is, I haven't done this since I was in college, where you actually engage everybody. I had to engage every single person that walked through a door, which honestly sounds easy. It's really frustrating. I had been cussed out multiple times because just like, oh, what are you selling me? But a guy trained me. He was from Egypt. His name was Ollie. And he was a really interesting story, and I really listened to him first before I actually engaged in anything Christ, because his father was a Muslim from Egypt, and his mother was a Catholic, which I thought was absolutely hilarious how that actually works out. But all he had to do was he had tons of questions for me. I didn't have to say a word. It's funny how the term pastor, because my boss, funny enough, who was Catholic, was going to be a priest, and he told Ollie that I was a pastor. Well, I think it took about 2 days in the training, and I think we spent an entire training session. Instead of training me, all I did was answer his questions, which is a pretty awesome and cool thing to do, right? But that's kind of what I'm talking about. I didn't sit there and be over-aggressive. I didn't sit there and just hit him. It's like, hey, are you saved? Let me tell you about Jesus. Right? That's abrasive. That's uncomfortable half the time, and that's not what we're talking about when you're talking about actions with Jesus. Sometimes you just have to listen to others and give them the opportunity to tell them their story, and all you have to do is listen. And usually in that, comes a question. And if you can't answer the question, that's okay. Like what I would tell them sometimes, because there was other times where that would happen, I was like, I'll get to you tomorrow, or I'll get to you the next meeting, because I got to actually go look that up. And people are usually content with that. In recent years, have I influenced multiple people to consider following Christ? That's a question you need to ask yourselves when it comes to the actions of Christ. I regularly choose to have meals with people with very different faiths or morals from me. And this is an example in Matthew 10, which we're going to go a little bit through. It says, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. So do you guys have non-Christians over to eat? Eating's a big deal. Everyone likes to eat. It's like the easiest thing to get people to do. It's like, hey, I'll make you some brisket. You want to come over and eat it with me? Most people will say yes. Just saying. I would. I try to discover the needs of non-Christians rather than waiting for them to come to me. I am personally spending time with non-believers to help them follow Jesus. Once again, those are actions like Jesus. Do we do those things as a church? I would say normally in American churches abroad, as I said, I'm a second-generation pastor. A lot of the times you don't see that. People, my wife will tell you she is very annoyed because I would always, before COVID, mind you, COVID's a little different, I would bring people over all the time. Right, honey? And I would cook. And she's like, wow, we didn't have the money for you to buy a ribeye. And I went, what? People wanted it. I'm sorry, honey, right? Because cooking for people is fun and it has a lot of impact on people. All right, attitudes like Jesus. I see God-given value in every person, regardless of their past or present condition. Do we do that? I would actually say most of these, especially like beliefs, everyone in this room would probably agree with, especially in the independent Christian church faith. I see God-given value in every person, regardless of their past or present condition. I believe God is for everyone. I would say everyone would agree with that. I see God in working people's lives. I see God working in people's lives, even when they are not following Him. It is more important to help people know God than it is for them to make sure they are sinners. Right? Do we spend more time saying selling the hope of God or presenting the hope of God, or are we just saying, hey, you're a sinner, you need to come to church and fix your ways? That can be a common theme. I feel compassion for people who are not following God and doing immoral things. Now, those are all things that look like Christ-like, or attitudes like Christ, or actions that look like Christ, right? Now let's go to the other flip side, the self-righteous actions, the actions like Pharisees. I tell others the most important thing in my life is following God's rules. Basically, telling others they just need to stop a particular sin, come to church, and we'll fix you right up, right? That's not the attitude that we want to have. I don't talk about my sins or struggles. That's between me and God. See, that's a pretty common thing. We don't like to share our brokenness, right? I think I was watching sermons online to make sure I wasn't copying sermons, right? I don't want you guys to hear the same sermon twice in a row. Like, who wants to hear grace 3 weeks in a row? Grace is important. We just don't want to hear it 3 weeks in a row. So doing that, somebody, I don't know, raise your hand over here. You guys did the Terracotta thing. That was really awesome, right? That was a pretty sweet thing where we're all broken, and what God does is He shines His light through our brokenness. A lot of that has to do with that, but the thing is we don't share our cracks. Duct tape around them a lot of times because we're sitting here too worried about what someone might think of us in the next pew. That's not what we should do. If anything, we should seriously know each other's burdens and struggles so that we can actually use the light instead of trying to cover it up because we're embarrassed. That's Satan literally using shame to stop you using your witness, and that's a big deal, and I really think that's a big American church problem. We don't like people seeing our warts and our cracks and everything else. Let me see, where am I at here? All right. I try to avoid spending time with people who are openly gay or lesbian. That's a big one. That can be uncomfortable if you're not around it a lot. I can attest to that. Me and Caitlin worked with a gay person in the restaurant business. By the way, a lot of people in the restaurant business tend to be that way. But I think for the first while it was a little uncomfortable, and then it just became not uncomfortable. He would always ask us questions about our faith and whether or not we hate him or not, and we would just answer no, we don't. In our belief system, we hate the sin, not the sinner, and guess what? We're all sinners, so it'd be like hating myself, right? And that's a good attitude and mindset to have. Because eventually we want him to meet Jesus, and he's not going to do that, me telling him how bad he is, honestly. I like to point out those who do not have the right theology or doctrine. I'm going to throw a little asterisk next to this when I read it, because I think there is a time and place where you should stand up for right doctrine and right theology. I think a lot of the problem is we do that in improper times, and it can be abrasive. I think it is important to have sound doctrine and theology. And I also think sometimes we just argue about some of the stupidest things. in all honesty. Like, when should we have communion? At the beginning or the end? Let's create a new congregation because we disagree. Like, what are we doing here? Like, so much for unity, right? Or another fun one that I don't think anyone, there's a debate between Arminianism and Calvinism. If you guys don't know what those are, have fun with that YouTube rabbit hole. But essentially, it has to do with predestination and not predestination. And funny thing is that they've been arguing this point for thousands of years, and no one's come up with the answer. So here, right? But that's kind of my point. Know the time and place. I'm not going to sit there and have a deep conversation about like Arminianism and Calvinism, and there's a non-Christian standing right there wondering, what are we talking about? Not proper time to actually start hammering down sound doctrine. Now, if I'm in a room with my buddies, perfect time, right? Absolute perfect time. It's not going to get in the way of anyone's journey to Christ or anything like that. So I'm going to throw a little asterisk next to that point, right? People who follow God's rules are better than those who do not. That's a big one, right? That's elitism. And sometimes, I'm not saying, like, as I said, but I think as a church, sometimes we can have that attitude. All right, so I'm going to get into specifics. I really like the, you guys can do anything with that list. He has it on the computer now. If you guys want to add to that and say, like, hey, we could get better here. That's the whole point of the sermon, right? But I want to do the fun thing because I think it's a big deal. It really worked in my ministry and youth, is eating with people. And we're going to kind of break down that story in Matthew 9, where Jesus eats with Matthew and tax collectors and sinners. And we're going to kind of break that story down a little bit because I like stories. Matthew 9 through 13, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew, kind of already gone through this, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him, and Matthew got up, followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they were asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners. See, the fun thing about the story is Matthew was a tax collector, right? And we kind of have to know some context. Tax collectors weren't like favorable people, but it's more than that, okay? He worked for the Romans and took money from the Jews and sent it to Rome. He was a tax collector. He was like a trader. It would be as if, context the story, right, because I like stories, China came over, dominated us, and then all of a sudden I went and worked for China to take your money. Probably wouldn't like me very much, would you? Probably not, right? So we already have this idea. So the Pharisees, who are the leaders of the Jewish community, don't like tax collectors, and then they see Jesus, who's kind of like the hype man, right? He's coming up the ranks, he's getting some attention, and then he's like, all of a sudden, well, how can we bury this man, Jesus? Oh, he's eating with tax collectors and sinners. What I mean by sinners, think about his disciples. They were fishermen. Have you guys ever, like, my brother's in the Navy, and I know how he talks. Not really. It's pretty colorful, right? So it's not like he's, sitting down with Billy Graham, right? He wasn't sitting down with the Billy Grahams of his day. He was sitting down with construction workers, sailors, and everybody else. And that's who he chose to have his company with. And then now we look at today's church and how many congregations can say that they have a major influence with that type of community or that type of background. We really don't. And that's kind of my challenge. To you guys today, as I said, I don't necessarily know you, but as a youth minister, I touched that. As a youth minister, I would go do that. And you know what the funny part is I actually got a lot of flack because people were like, why does this 28-year-old man want to spend his weekend with 16-year-olds? That's kind of creepy. And I'm just like, that's my job. And technically, that should be your job too. It really bugged me and irked me, and honestly, it did put a toll on me and my family because of that, right? Because we're trying to live out a Christ-like manner, and because of perception or reputation, which if you look at Christ's life, he did not care. Right? They called him a drunkard because he made water into wine and probably drank. And then I would live that same lifestyle, and sometimes that lifestyle, that radical lifestyle that we're called to live, gets picked at a little bit. So that's just something to think about, right? And also, something to think about as well is, as I said, I do this a lot. How many times do you share a meal with a non-Christian, just in general? The importance of that. We already have an example of Christ doing that. But the importance of spending a meal with somebody. If anything, if you make a good meal and have them over and you do it multiple times, it will disarm them, period. It just does. Don't ask me why. That's a God question. Why does food in our stomach disarm people to where you can ask questions and talk about life? That is a big deal. So I would almost encourage you, try and do that. hold on, COVID, I get it. Maybe wait till COVID's over, okay, until, that vaccine comes out and we all have microchips according to Bill Gates and all that fun conspiracy. Not really. But that's something to think about is who can I invite over? Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's a coach, right? I tried to invite multiple times. I think I was successful once, but there was a coach that I worked with, football coach for Fremont Mills, and I would try to have him come over because he was a disgruntled Catholic. He did not want to work with me when he found out I was going to be the assistant baseball coach because he hated pastors and hated religion. And I think, and funny enough, I've had conversations with that enough just by our interactions on a bus, talking about dinosaurs and Job and aliens and my opinions on that and all the stupid questions he would ask me. And then dinner, I actually did their wedding. He changed some of the mindset. It was no longer like, now his mindset's like, not all Christians are bad, just most. So there's a little crack in his armor there that I'm hoping someone else will send somebody in his life now that I've moved away that can finish the job. Because that's all we're there to do is make friends, eat meals with people, and do the best we can and give an example of Christ-like behavior. One more fun story I want to talk about, and we'll shortly wrap this up, has to do with, so we just read a story about Christ hanging out with sinners and tax collectors. The fun thing to point out, though, is Christ did want to also influence the religious or the self-righteous. He had dinner multiple times with Pharisees, and he wanted to teach and instruct them just as much as that because, once again, Jesus didn't discriminate. He didn't sit there and just bash on the religious people all the day and then just love the sinner. He did it both ways. Most of the time he just said, stop your way of sinning and come follow me, right? So in this, in Luke 7, 36 through 50, we'll read the story real quick. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisees who had invited him in saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who he is touching and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owned money at a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other one 50. Neither of them had any money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had a bigger debt to be forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. And then he turned towards the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I've entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You do not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this man who even forgives sins? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Now the funny thing I like about the story, religious leader invites him over for dinner, and he got chastised, right? What the heck? Like, I invite people over all the time, and if someone talked to me like that, I'd be a little upset. Period. Right? That's crazy. But in all honesty, like one little sentence in there kind of created the whole thing. Right? He sat there and cast judgment on this woman and didn't even know. Right? That is an attitude thing. His actions were fine. He came in and he gave him some food. Right? He came in there and was going to be a guest, get everything going, and then because he judged the woman who, like he said, had sinned much and needed much forgiveness. I mean, I've screwed up a lot in life, but I don't think it'd be hard for me to like generate enough tears to wash someone's feet that wore sandals all the time. Just saying, right? That's a lot of tears, right? And I do need a haircut, but I don't have hair long enough. I guess my wife does, and women have a long enough hair to wash the feet. But would you really do that? And I don't think I could. I don't know. But that's the cool thing about this story, right? It really emphasizes your attitude beyond your actions, because the Pharisees' actions weren't wrong, but his attitude was. See, a lot of times our attitude reflects our actions. A lot of times in church, and I can actually attest this being a kid, we spend way more times on the action than our attitudes. We care more about who does what and how they do it and whether or not they're doing a good job, rather than if they come into church, carry themselves, and are excited to be here and have a good time, period. And I would say that is more important than the actions part. Can you come into a church service and just be excited to be here? Not have complaints, not have like, man, the drums were too loud. I would worship minister. That's a common thing, right? Drums are too loud. Why does it got to be so loud? I don't know, because I'm in my 30s and I like to rock out a bit, right? But that has a lot to do with millennials. It's kind of the whole beginning part of this discussion, why millennials don't want to come to church. It's boring. It doesn't entertain us, which is probably not the best thing, but here's the thing. If you want new Christians to come to church, you probably should entertain them some, right? They're drinking milk. They need some attention span to come there. Or otherwise, you know what's going to happen otherwise? And this is the truth a lot about small-town churches, and it's really sad because there's a lot of great Christians, men of faith, that want to serve in small towns, but because of the small little aspect that we expect non-Christians to not be entertained because that's just the wrong way to do it, some churches might die that shouldn't. And that's a small reality of the whole thing. And it's sad, and because yes, I was born by city people. I like small towns because I don't like traffic. A little true. And not only that, the people are just nice. There's a woman named Phyllis, one former. She did a better job cutting my hair than anybody that I ever paid to do it. And she's just a wonderful, most lovely old lady. And I just love small towns. That's why even me and Caitlin, I want to do worship ministry. I want to do worship ministry in a small town. If I have to do youth ministry with that, I'm okay with doing that because I love small town people. Your guys' hearts are huge. But sometimes we need to focus a little more on the attitude aspect instead of the actions. And I'll do one more story, and we'll start here to close this up. I remember I was working, doing youth ministry once again, and a bunch of the teenagers in the youth group made a big mistake. Shocker, right? Teenagers made a mistake. And it involved drinking and everything else. And a grandmother came up to me and said, "What are we going to do?" And I looked at her and said, "Nothing." What do you mean, what are we going to do? They're making choices. It's our job to guide them and say, "Yeah, you probably screwed up here, and you're going to have to deal with these consequences. But that's not what's important here. You screwed up. The cool thing is Christ died on the cross and you're forgiven. We need to talk about why did this happen? How did you get there? What can we do to adjust that? I don't care that you did it. It's done. It's over." That's the wonderful thing about a cross, but that's the attitude aspect. She didn't like that answer. I remember having a meeting about it the next day with the elders, and they kind of agreed with me, which was nice. But it was just like, we don't do anything. They have to live their lives. They are 12, 13, 15-year-old kids that are just learning this thing called life. And guess what? They're going to screw up. I still screw up, and I'm 30. I just don't do that. Right? Partially, one, I'm 21. I'm not going to get in trouble by the law. Two, it's just I know what self-control is. They're just figuring out self-control. It's our job to guide them to see what it looks like, not judge them on it. The worst thing you could do, and this is not only with teenagers as adults, and kind of we're talking about the self-righteousness with Pharisees, to judge that person. We need to guide them, teach them what self-discipline is. Because they probably don't know what it is. For whatever reason. Don't ask me. Maybe their parents weren't that great. I don't know, because shocker, there aren't great parents sometimes. Self-discipline and all that. And I just want to close out with an encouraging word because, once again, I talk fast and I like to be teached. But the encouraging word is here is the big thing is see what you can do to invite non-Christians to go eat at your house after COVID. Right? That's the big thing to do. Go home, sit with your wives, or if you don't have a wife and you're just a single bachelor or single woman hanging it out and doing whatever, see what you can do. See what you can do to invite somebody over. If you're a bad cook, guess what? There's YouTube. YouTube has some great recipes. They even show you how to do it, how to use a knife. It's great, right? Try and create a dinner for non-Christians. And don't just do it once, because once won't matter. Do it multiple times. And that will actually see immense growth in your church just by creating meals. Right? You don't hear that a lot. Every time you're trying to see church growth, they're like got the 6 steps, the 7 steps to create a wonderful church. And it's like if you just cook for people, right, and do it in your house, you're going to generate a lot of Christ-like attitude that will make an impact. Because your life and your kindness and your love and your hope will actually show people, non-Christians, what you care. And that's number one thing that Christ did in the Bible is, one, he cared. Right? That's step 1, care. Step 2, probably pray. And step 3, have fun being a Christian, because it is pretty fun. If you've ever been to a winter jam, it's a blast, right? You got to like drums, though, so sorry for people that don't like drums. But with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray over the congregation. If you have any questions or, like I said, I don't know anybody here if you're new to this or if you want to accept Christ, go find an elder. You can talk to me, but guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to ship you to an elder or a deacon to the best of my ability. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate just seeing adults. I spend most of my weeks with 3-year-olds, so it's really nice just to see a face and see response and not have to like sit there and go, say yes or no, right? I need you to speak better, Thomas. But if you bow your heads with me real quick, we're going to pray, and just thanks for having me. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for today. I just want to pray over this congregation as they're in search of a new pastor, and pray for the leadership and the committee that's trying to make those decisions as they move forward. It seems wonderful people, Lord, and I just want you to also maybe put some people on their hearts as they think of people that they might want to invite over for dinner or just have an impact with or just guide and follow towards you, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.